Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for your inspiring lecture. And I feel so honored to give my personal response here. Dr. Jackson explores the complicated relationships between migration, theology, and dynamics of diaspora, particularly focusing on the European context and its implications for contemporary theology in Australia. Jackson reflects on his own experiences as a migrant and how they shaped his understanding of migration and theology. He critiques how traditional theology often reflects Eurocentric assumptions, emphasizing the need to decenter Eurocentric perspectives in theological discourse. A major contribution Dr. Jackson makes to scholarship is to advocate for a more inclusive understanding of theology in diasporic contexts that acknowledges the complexities of migration and the various voices that contribute to it, particularly those emerging from non-Western diasporic contexts. He introduces 4 theologians from diverse backgrounds who represent different aspects of migrant theology. He discusses how these theologians navigate their identities and theological expressions within the context of their diasporic experiences. Before reviewing the inherently kinetic nature and energy of their theological work in new contexts, Dr. Jackson draws on the work of Thomas Nail. Jackson presents a framework of kenopolitics, emphasizing how migration and movement shaped social structures and theological understandings. He argues for understanding societies as regimes of motion, which allows for a more fluid interpretation of theological and social identities. By seeing the evidence of the kinetic nature of contextual theologies in the collective work of the 4 theologians, Dr. Jackson has successfully brought out a new understanding of apostolicity, suggesting that the migrant experience can enrich Christian theology, emphasizing fluidity and contextuality. According to Jackson, the experiences of migration and diaspora are internal to the story of Christian church. It is not merely somebody else's story. It is also our story. If we forget this story, we lose touch with our vital resource for engaging with the people alongside whom we live, work, witness, and pray. Jackson challenges the church to recognize its own connection to migration, thereby fostering a sense of shared humanity and responsibility. He develops a theology of migration that emphasizes the ethical responsibilities of faith communities towards migrants. I would now like to invoke the biblical text to illustrate how the migration experiences of the faith communities shaped their understanding of migrant theology, and to highlight the obligation of the faith communities to allow migrants to flourish in integrated social contexts. It is not an exaggeration to assert that the books of Jeremiah and Ezekiel are deeply influenced by migration. The looming siege and eventual fall of Jerusalem, along with the resulting involuntary migrations, forced deportations, and hopes for a return are central themes throughout these texts. Jeremiah and Ezekiel speak from the perspective of migrants, involuntary in both cases, but by extrapolation, also those moving more voluntarily. Jeremiah 29 is a text explicitly about the experience of involuntary migrants. It illustrates the experience of involuntary migration to a large cosmopolitan city, fostering a pragmatic, open mindset towards integration with outsiders and promoting social cohesion. Jeremiah 29 verses 1 to 14 preserve a letter from the prophet Jeremiah to the priests, the prophets, the rest of the elders of the exiled community, and to all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. The first part of this letter in verses 1 to 9 encourages these involuntary migrants in the city of Babylon to build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce, and to marry and ensure their children marry as well, in order to multiply their community. The advice concludes by encouraging the Israelites to seek the welfare of the city to which Yahweh has exiled them, and pray to Yahweh on its behalf, for it is there they will prosper. The letter persuades the Israelite involuntary migrants living in this urban setting to actively connect with people beyond their enclave, promoting openness to outsiders and fostering a positive, hopeful outlook on the potential outcomes of those interactions. Verses 1 to 9 indeed are expressions of integration. The second part of the letter in verses 10 to 19 offers hope. After 70 years, Yahweh will regather them to the place from which Yahweh sent them into exile. In this way, it motivates the community to preserve its identity, upholding their distinctiveness through ongoing loyalty to Yahweh, while remaining non-hostile towards outsiders. In sum, in Jeremiah 29, the prophet urges Israelite migrants to embrace the opportunities offered by the cosmopolitan city of Babylon without giving up their loyalty to Yahweh. In other words, Jeremiah supports blending into a new setting while simultaneously maintaining traditions essential for preserving key elements of their identity. In contrast to Jeremiah, Ezekiel holds a completely different stance regarding open and positive interaction with the host population in Babylon. He finds it impossible to envision reconciliation among the diverse perspective of Israelite community, much less any constructive engagement between the Israelites in Babylon and their Babylonian host. Ezekiel 11, 14 to 21 presents a supposed message from those still in Jerusalem, asserting that their presence there indicates Yahweh's preference for them and a rejection of the involuntary migrants among whom the prophet lives. Ezekiel counters this assertion, clarifying that Yahweh now stays with the migrants as a little sanctuary. The rhetoric promotes a closed community that includes only a subset of Israelites, definitely excluding the outsiders, encouraging them to maintain their previous way of life as closely as possible to their time in Jerusalem. Ezekiel's perspective on the host community in Babylon is completely opposed to the 1% in Jeremiah 29, as it emerges from and reacts to a social setting that is entirely different from the integrated urban multicultural context described in Jeremiah 29, described in the Jeremiah's letter to the exiles. At the beginning of the book, Ezekiel speaks to a community of involuntary migrants near the Hibar Canal, a remote area. It is likely that Ezekiel and these migrants were engaged in substantial irrigation projects managed by the Babylonian authorities. The book of Ezekiel envisions a community living in a nearly isolated and monocultural context. The theocentric and ethnocentric perspective advocated by Ezekiel aligns closely with observations made among various migrant groups living in such isolated settings. Dr. Jackson explores how migration shapes theological understanding and community dynamics, emphasizing the fluidity of identity and the transformative potential of diasporic experiences. In my opinion, Jeremiah 29 and Ezekiel 11 fit easily into the cross-cultural pattern described by Dr. Jackson, drawing attention to how the social settings of migrants influence their views on engagement with outsiders and on the identity of the self. Coming back to the lecture today, Jackson's lecture is valuable and encourages deeper reflection on how to understand missiology and theology within the context of diaspora, aiming to enhance the development of constitutive theologies that are suitable for global Christianity. His work deserves attention from Christians who engage with issues of migration and identity. Thank you.